While the Cosmic Rays Pavilion started to place Candela in the public's eye, the kind of structures that would afford Candela to keep his construction company in business was the umbrella form. These umbrella forms are essentially an upside-down umbrella, and he designed so many of these and received so many commissions for work for these that he was able to keep his company going and then have the opportunity to design the more custom, the more creative forms that we're going to also see throughout this lecture. The umbrella also has as a foundation another umbrella form. So this umbrella foundation essentially cups the earth in this high seismic region of Mexico City. We could look at the umbrella and separate it into 4 parts, and each of those 4 parts represents essentially a Hypar formed that are joined in those valleys. So the sketches you see on your screen, you see the straight line generators that create this warp surface, the doubly curved hyperbolic paraboloid form. The idea for this umbrella came from a paper from a Frenchman named Imond, published in 1936. If we compare Candela's design on the left to Imond's design on the right, we see some differences. The similarities are that they're both umbrella forms, but the differences are that Imond's form, we could look at the column, for example, it's shorter and wider, so it's more a squat structure, whereas Candela's columns are taller, thinner, I would say more elegant. The umbrella shape itself, the shell, on the edge of that shell, Imond placed deep beams, which are there for a rational purpose, and we could see how the depth of that beam increases as we reach those valleys. Again, a rational approach to design, whereas Candela has a thin beam going along, but it's thinner and it's of constant depth. Through experimentation and built designs, Candela was able to determine the optimum rise to area ratio for these umbrellas. In other words, through experimentation, he's able to optimize the shape. Rio's warehouse is an example where Candela used umbrellas. This warehouse was completed in 1954, and it had 36 umbrellas. Each one was 10 meters by 15 meters wide. The cost was 50 cents per square foot, about half the cost of conventional steel construction with corrugated aluminum roofs. There were 4 sets of umbrella forms, 1 set done per week. Therefore, the entire project was completed in only 3 months. The High Life Textile Factory, completed in 1955, is another derivative of these umbrella forms. The umbrellas were typically tilted. You can see the sawtooth profile of Rio's warehouse, and that tilt right at that sawtooth allowed light to enter the space. With the High Life Textile Factory, they were also tilted, but in addition to being tilted to allow that light well to enter, he inserted glass bricks into the shell itself. So this flooded the space with light, but too much light. It got very warm in there, and unfortunately today, that brick glass is covered. Each set of forms was essentially 1 quadrant of the umbrella shape. So the shaded part of the sketch represents the straight line pieces of wood that you see below that sketch, representing the formwork used to essentially shape that umbrella. And on the right, you see an image of one of those pieces of formwork being lowered since the concrete had hardened. The subway station Candelaria, completed in 1967, is also a derivative of this umbrella form. We can see these umbrellas, but they're different from what I was showing earlier. The umbrellas are essentially pinched. Each leaf or quadrant is pinched to create a very plastic, fluid-looking design. To allow light to enter the space, instead of tilting the umbrellas, he separated them, and you can see in the image there's light and glass placed in between to allow light to enter that subway station. A scale factor next to the column of this umbrella gives you a sense for the size and height of that space. In a close-up look of the umbrellas, we see the imprint of that formwork. That imprint, straight line generators, indication of this Hypar shape, an indication of how it was built. By the early 60s, Candela was designing about 30 umbrellas per week, and Mexico City had 3 million square feet covered with umbrellas. Probably the greatest play of this umbrella form was for Our Lady of the Miraculous Metal Church, completed in 1955. I abbreviate it with the name Milagrosa, where Milagrosa means miraculous in Spanish. If I didn't tell you this was a derivative of the umbrella form, you probably wouldn't pick that up. So how is the shape for Milagrosa generated? Candela explains that he takes an asymmetric umbrella, tips it so that the short edge is touching the ground, takes the center of that short edge and lifts it to create a peak, and then places two of them leaning one against another. So with this, you see one bay of the Milagrosa church. The church committee, when they designed the space or commissioned this work, they wanted a Gothic church, something representing a Gothic cathedral. Candela took this idea and essentially redefined Gothic. Again, Candela was hired as the contractor, not the architect, and the architect had in mind a single curvature, barrel-like structure, something similar to an airplane hangar, for example. But Candela was successful in changing that design to the design that you see now. A redesign of Gothic, a reinterpretation of Gothic, something that the monks actually did not like very much while they saw it being constructed, but the people of the town loved it very much, and today, still, it's a much admired church for that town. When one walks on the inside, we see the very high ceiling, a lot of light entering the space, again, a redefinition of Gothic. A scale factor next to those columns, again, you see the size of those columns, which is appropriate for the size or the scale of the structure. From the outside, there are two what I would call interesting features. One is the scalloped ridge at the top of the shell. Here's where the concrete thickens, and it thickens not necessarily for an aesthetic reason, but really it's there for a practical reason. In his calculations, Candela determined that there would be too much tension in the shell unless there was more weight added at the top. So Candela's solution to adding more weight was to add more concrete and thickening it. But he didn't just add a slab of concrete, he created this scalloped pattern to make it more aesthetic. The second feature that can only really be seen from a helicopter or aerial view is a drain pipe that runs through the column. This is a feature of all the umbrella shells because the umbrellas would capture water, so there's a drain pipe that runs through those columns, and sometimes that water is drained into a cistern that can be used for irrigation.